think that is almost not, it's not a certainty for sure, but it's something that we can comfortably predict. And after that, I was actually thinking about the line that Robert suggested first and that we were considering a bit.
So knight c5, knight b4.
Queen b2, bishop b7 is by far the most natural move. a3 is not forced, but the knight on b4 is super annoying, and black will not voluntarily leave that square with the knight. So probably white will at some point have to kick that knight back. And knight b to d5 is the first moment when I think black has a very difficult choice, because knight c6 also just trying to trade off some pieces. The knight on d5 looks very good, but it's also vulnerable to, at some point, an e4 push, kicking it away. So black might also consider trading off knights with knight to c6, which looks like you lost some time, but on the other hand, did you really lose time? That knight spent 2 moves to get to the same square. On the other hand, white played a3 and queen b2 with those 2 moves, and those moves aren't particularly useful, let's say.
Well, Mike Klein made a Groundhog Day reference, and you're asking, did you really lose time? This is getting philosophically complicated.
Well, we have knight c to e5, so it might be about to get concretely complicated here. If we get the variations you guys have been predicting, it as you said, Robert, it's anybody's game, and it's going to be a real maneuvering battle, which I'm excited for. I think it'll be interesting to see.
I'm just wondering what took Magnus so long to play that move.
Yeah.
Because it was the most natural move. And knight back to d2, as Fabiano highlighted earlier, it doesn't feel like you're taking a step in the right direction.
Right.
Retreating, you're not, you may have some ideas later in the game, but it does feel like black should be happy to see that move. So knight c to e5 felt like the intuitive response, but maybe there were other options that Magnus was exploring. I mean, we can't discount even moves like knight to a3. We wouldn't talk about it, but knight to a3, which is a very weird-looking move. The point is the c file has all sorts of issues here, and okay, clearly it doesn't work out, but I'm trying to get into Magnus's head. I'm doing a bad job.
Well, I think also sometimes, when you're in that position, you're not just calculating, of course, knight c d5, but maybe trying to go as deeply down the rabbit hole as you can before committing to it. But I agree. Magnus's time management started out fantastic, but ever since knight bd2 was met by knight c6, it's been rather curious.
Well, I think that's a good point that you just made, because we wonder why he's spending time. But even though we know that this is the most natural move, and it's the first move he considers, very often the most natural move is not the best one. And if you rush through these decisions, sometimes, not in this case, but sometimes you will miss better moves which are not quite the most natural.
Right.
And the time he spends here is going to be useful later on, because he's calculating through lines that will happen. When he calculates knight c d5, he is looking through the variation which we're starting to see on the board, and that will save him time later on. So this time is not wasted just because he used it on a move where maybe it seems like an obvious decision. And concretely, in the line that we were considering, queen b2, bishop to b7, a3, and knight b to d5, not forced move, I should mention again, but let's just say that he does this. Knight to d3 and bishop to b6. I was thinking about a move here which looks interesting. We were mentioning bishop to g5, knight to d4, moves like that, but I'm wondering about the move a4. Because if b takes a4, rook takes a4, that e4 move is a threat. And if, let's say, black plays rook a to c8 now, to threaten knight c3, potentially, bishop to d2 covers that nicely. And again, black no longer has knight to e4 here, because of the rook. That rook on a4 is actually a fantastic piece. And although this might seem a bit crazy, imagine black plays bishop c6 here.
I want to show these lines. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking rook to h4 is potentially a very dangerous rook there. It looks like rooks don't belong on h4, but that's an attacking piece.
Well, especially if ideas like e4 are to follow, maybe both knights are kicked from the king's side, and who knows how quickly the white army might start attacking over here. So
this could get double-edged.
Yeah.
And the queen and rook on e7, f8, if the bishop gets to the a3, f8 diagonal, and e4 kicks the knight away, so you can play bishop b4 next, there are many tactical threats here in the position. So this a4 move is really nice, honestly, for white. And what Fabiano recommended, because you're also throwing a5 to kick the bishop off its very strong diagonal, and black can play a6 to clear more room in the diagonal. So if a5, bishop goes back to a7, that's safe and sound. And if you trade on b5, well, it's just a pawn trade. It doesn't seem to be the end of the world for black. But you are putting decisions into black's hands, and some of them may not be so simple.
Yeah, I think a6 is probably the likely response, but I really love that idea of just how effective a rook along the fourth rank might be in a surprise way.
Yeah, I think a6 might be keeping the position pretty much equal, and probably maybe b takes a4 is also equal, but a6 feels like a safer option because why you don't want to give your opponent all the fun.
Yeah.
And an active rook on a4 that could swing to the king side. But even if it doesn't, at least it's performing a useful function in stopping knight to e4 and preparing e4. So if we see a4 in this position, then I think we'll very likely see a6 in response. The other move which I was considering, and actually I can do this with the inclusion of a4 a6 or the move before, is knight f to e5. The knight just looks pretty good there. It also stops knight to e4, so white can play bishop d2. And although I don't think e4 is really a threat, it could be a threat one day, especially in conjunction with bishop to d2, e4, bishop to b4, exploiting that skewer of the queen and rook on e7, f8. So knight f to e5, also a very natural move. I don't know what black will do in response. Maybe rook f to d8. That looks like a good response. Just, putting the rook on an open line. And also, white's knight on f3 was defending d4. Now it's no longer defending d4.
Right.
One day you might see a bishop to d4 tactic.
Yeah, knight c3 actually could be a move for black in the near future. Let's say white plays h3, some kind of random move. Like ideas with knight c3 are possible in many of these positions because there's bishop d4 tactics, right? So you just have to keep an eye out on these things in such a position. But yeah, that looks very reasonable for black. And it goes back to your earlier point, Fabiano, that knight b4 to d5 after a3, right? That move seems very sensible. You're bringing your knight to the most advanced retreating square possible. But knight c6 as well, because now you're not allowing both of white's knights, one firmly entrenched on d3, the other coming to e5. And so both those moves have their appeal. And that's why oftentimes these top players, Jan and Magnus both here, spend this time. And they're trying to figure out which will allow my defense to be easier, which will give me more chances to try to play for a win. So these decisions are not easy, even if both of them, or maybe especially because both of them have the same evaluation. And the players are using their internal evaluation function, their brains. And
Is that the internal eval bar? Your brain?
Exactly. And even with the eval bar live on the screen, two options that both say zeros, or maybe like 0.1 better for white, whatever it is, how do you choose between them? They're both equal, right? They're both level positions, but they have very different dynamics.
Not just a hat rack, an internal eval bar.
Sometimes if you have two moves like that and you can't really decide between them because they look roughly equivalent, you can think, what would my opponent rather see? And I think that Magnus would actually rather see knight b to d5 because it allows him more options. After knight to d3, bishop to b6, we already saw a4, knight f to e5. These looked like interesting moves. After knight c6, white doesn't really want the trade of knights because that would pretty much liquidate any potential advantage. Like knight takes c6, bishop takes c6. I don't think white is playing for anything here. It's going to be equal, but that's the best that white will have.
No longer any tactics on the c file, of course, because the queen is removed from that file, and we see bishop e7 is already on the board, so we'll keep analyzing because we are probably right on track here as they're about to get the lines we're anticipating.
And after knight c6, if white plays knight d3, bishop to b6, I have a feeling the knight is slightly better on c6 than d5. It doesn't get hit by e4, and black has a very simple plan here. Rook a to d8, or rook f to d8 potentially, and then knight to d4. Not only trading all the knights, but it would be very difficult to capture on d4 because it would open up pins, the skewer again on the queen on b2 and rook on a1. So here it seems like black has a slightly easier plan, while with the knight on d5, he has to worry about that e4 coming at some moment, which he would rather not allow his pieces to get pushed back like that.
Well, we see a3 has been played, so you guys continue to play the role of a prophet here, looking into